Hi, good morning, Scott.
Hey Tim, how you doing, buddy?
All right.
Great to be on. Thank you.
I appreciate you very much, and just want to get right into it today. Um, just want to hear a little bit about your background in baseball, and where you're from, and a little bit about your playing and coaching career.
Yeah, so my situation is a little bit unique in that I get teased by my buddies all the time that I never left Oak Creek. I grew up here, lived in Oak Creek since I was 5 years old. Went to elementary, middle school, high school here. Played high school baseball, obviously. Was lucky enough to do four different sports here at Oak Creek High School, and baseball obviously was always my first love and my passion. Was part of a special group of guys coming up through our little league. This is again back in the early 90s when it was still pretty much everyone did little league, and then got to high school, got to play a little AAU ball, which with some kids from other some really good players from Franklin and Greendale and South Milwaukee and New Berlin, etc. um, and yeah, just stayed in Oak Creek. Had a nice high school career, playing for Joel Parr, and really started to realize probably my junior year, like that teaching and coaching was something I really wanted to do. Um, Played infield, and I could run a little bit, and played good defense. Could hit for a little bit of average, but not enough power to be a big recruit or anything like by any of those means. So after high school, went to UWM. Had a chance to go play at a couple other D3 schools or whatnot, but decided UWM was where I wanted to go. Wanted to get into education. Had a good education program. Being in an urban setting was important to me at the time, and so went the UWM route. Unfortunately, they were loaded in the middle infield. That was right around the time they were making their run and beating Rice in the College World Series. So instead of sticking around and being a third string second baseman and shortstop, I kind of saw the writing on the wall there, and Peter Dooley was lucky enough. I was lucky enough to have him ask me if I wanted to come and start coaching the freshman team at Oak Creek. So I started my coaching career pretty young. I was actually 18 years old still. So I was 17 when I graduated high school. So I was 18 when I started coaching that freshman team, and from there was his assistant for 4 years. I would be at the freshman games, the JV games, and the varsity games every day in the summer. Wasn't getting paid anything. Our freshman program at the time was run through the Booster Club, and yeah, so it was a great experience. I was an assistant for 4 years for Peter, then went over to Franklin when I did after my fiance told me I needed to start making some money coaching. So went over to Franklin and assisted Jim Hughes for a couple of years as his varsity assistant and freshman coach, and then came back to Oak Creek when Peter resigned and became the varsity coach in 2005. So that's kind of a quick recap of my journey, and like I said, really haven't left Oak Creek. Um, but I love it here, and now I'm the athletic director here, and enjoy that role immensely. And I know we'll maybe talk about that a little bit later.
And that was kind of my next question is about your full-time job. Obviously, it sounds like you started in the classroom. So
Yeah.
pre AD life, what were you in the classroom? Elementary
Yeah.
school?
Yeah. Fifth grade. I taught fifth grade for 10 years. I always said that was the perfect grade to teach because they were old enough where you could start to have some conversations with them about the real world, but you weren't still wiping noses and stuff like that. So, and they weren't yet to that middle school age where they thought they knew everything about everything. So yeah, 10 years, taught fifth grade right next door at Edgewood Elementary. So that made it nice and convenient because there was plenty of times where I'd need to come over to the high school, and maybe have a quick meeting with a kid or talk to a teacher about a kid. So did that until 2013 school year. And I had been in talks with our previous athletic director, Greg Lampy, about, how do you become an AD? What does that all look like? Do you have to get an administrative degree? Because I'll be honest, I never really had any intent on becoming a principal. That's just not something that interests me. I like the administrative side of things from an athletics side, but I didn't have any interest in being a principal. So he kind of guided me towards the NIAAA and WADA, the Wisconsin Athletic Directors Association. They actually offer a certification program, and I started that probably in like 2008, 2009, and got my certification through the NIAAA to be what's considered a certified athletic director. And then there's different levels you can work your way up, but at the time I just needed that initial certification. So unfortunately, it came a little sooner than I wanted. My predecessor Greg got sick, had some heart issues. He's doing fine now, but he had some heart issues that forced him to retire in 2013. So literally how it happened was the superintendent came over to Edgewood where I was teaching, pulled me out of class and said, hey, we love the work you do as a coach in the district and as a teacher, and you're the game manager for football, you're the game manager for basketball, so you know how everything works. You're the AD starting after Christmas break. And I was like, oh, okay. So the funny story, the only thing I'll add to that is she goes, are you willing to take it? And I said, well, I guess I have one condition. I still want to coach. I still want to coach baseball. And at the time it was kind of a no brainer for her because we were still playing summer baseball. So I do actually have a letter in my file at district office that says I basically can be the baseball coach, until the athletic director fires me, because I can't do both roles anymore. So as long as I continue to do a good job and manage it, and I've been lucky. I got some good mentors in Ryan McGinnis and John Matera down at Tremper that have helped me when I started this role, because they had been doing the same thing for a while.
Yeah, I think that dual role is interesting in the administrative chair. So as an AD, like as your full-time job as AD, how does it help you as a baseball coach? I mean, do you see things through a different lens? Speak on that for us.
I think it helps, and I got a great staff of coaches. It's a different staff than when I started. I will say that. I'll be honest. There were a few coaches who it took me a little while. I came in and I observed, and just kind of sat back and observed that first year or two. And I think what helps my relationship with all of them is I'm still living the same things they're living as a head coach. So, and nothing against athletic directors that obviously aren't coaches. At some point, most likely they did live it, but I'm still in the moment. Like when I have a conversation with my coaches, I can literally tell them, well, I had this situation last season, or I'm going to go through this season, this upcoming season. Here's a situation I'm facing. And I think that helps our relationships. I think they, and some of them have even told me they appreciate, being able to have candid coaching conversations versus, I'm whatever administration, however you want to slice it. I mean, you're a teacher, so I don't feel like when they talk to me, yes, I have that title. I don't feel like we're talking as administrator to coach. I think most of our conversations are coach to coach. And I think that really helps. And I think the kids appreciate that too, because like I said, some kids call me Mr. Holler in the gym or whatever, or in the hallway, but most of them, to be honest with you, call me Coach, Coach Holler. So I think, again, I'm still kind of viewed as just Coach Holler around here, which is totally fine by me.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. Speaking of coaches, and you mentioned your time, on that part of the state, and Coach Hughes and John Gillespie. So, tell me about your Mount Rushmore of coaching. Yeah. Like who are the 3 or 4 guys that you think have really been enormous mentors to you, when you first got started, or even now?
Right. And you're right. I think when you sent me that question to kind of prepare for today's show, I was like, holy cow, how do you get down to 3 or 4? But that's the fun of it, right? So I think you're right. I think it's two different Mount Rushmores, and I'm gonna cheat on the question here.
Right.
I think as a young coach, it was, and it still to this day, I think I took a lot from Joel Parr, who was my head coach. I think any of us who have played sports, you always remember that coach that had that first big impact on you, and that was definitely Joel Parr, who was my head varsity coach here at Oak Creek. And the reason I say that is he took over in the early 90s when Oak Creek baseball was pretty much a doormat for quite a few years. Nothing against the guy that was before him or anything like that, but there just wasn't a lot of talent coming through. And Joel brought this passion. He started working with us when we were little leaguers, so we all knew who he was. So he was a 24-year-old kid at the time. And I remember him coming when we were in middle school, working with our all-star teams and things like that, which is, that's how you got to do it. And his passion and energy that he brought to our program was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And, he was only the varsity head coach for, I think, 6 years, but we joined the WIA in 1988. A lot of people don't know that. Oak Creek baseball was not a part of the WIA. They played in what was called like the Suburban Park Conference, like the summer conference. They weren't a part of the WIA until 1988. So in 1995, I think it was my sophomore year, we won our first ever WIA playoff game in 1995. So the history of our program doesn't go back all that far. And it really kind of started with Joel Parr and the energy he brought. So he would definitely be one, and he's our football coach now. So it's really cool. He came back. He was my assistant for a few years. I coached with him at Racine Prairie for a few years when he had the itch a couple of years later. So definitely Joel Parr. Peter Dooley, obviously, he gave me my start in coaching when it all shook out. When I was going to UWM, he was still the JV coach at the time. And he said, hey, if you want to come back next year, if things don't work out at UWM, you can come help with the JV. Well, then Joel resigned to spend more time with his family. Peter brought me on. And Peter was just great at putting kids in a position to be successful, very laid back, great at developing relationships. So definitely those two guys. And then I mentioned, kind of hard to distinguish, but as a young coach, and you and I have both been there, you look around when you're playing these games and you're watching other coaches, you're trying to pick things up from them. I was always impressed with how John Gillespie at South Milwaukee handled his program. John, and nothing against their players by any means, but it seemed like he always got the most out of the talent he had, and just always found a way to be competitive. We had some incredible battles with him when I was a young assistant coach for Peter at Oak Creek, and just the way, I remember him pulling his own son in the middle of an inning because his son looked at the umpire the wrong way in John's eyes. And, I just the integrity that John brought. And then the other two guys would have been Jim Hughes and Jerry Tobble. Obviously, I learned a lot from Jim those 2 years I was there. Jim took so much pride in Franklin baseball. And what Jim was great at was kind of the off season, the general manager type stuff. And he was a very good in-game coach by all means, not to take anything away from him there. But what he was good at was really promoting his program before the internet and before social media. Like, he made sure the community knew about his fundraisers. He made sure that, the players got a booklet before the year that knew the history of Franklin baseball and what it meant to wear the Franklin jersey. And so I definitely took a big piece of that with me when I came back to Oak Creek. And then the last guy at the time would have been Jerry Tobble. I just, another guy very much like Jim, the longevity that Jerry had and the way he carried himself and the way he cared about his players. You never heard of, I remember, getting to know some of the Donovan brothers and stuff that played for Jerry back in the day. And, Jerry just cared so deeply about his players and ran an incredibly successful program for a long time. Then fast forward to my kind of like more recent, man, I've developed over the last few years just an incredible respect for all the executive guys of the WBCA. And I know it's easy for me to say that because I'm on the board, but man, when I was an 18-year-old kid going to 19-year-old kid going to the clinic, the WBCA clinic, I was just always in awe of guys like Mark Fuller and Marty Paulson and Tom Wilson, Ron Kading, all those guys. And now to get to know those guys and see how much work they put in behind the scenes, it's really why, guys like me and you are sitting here talking today, because, think of Joe Waite and all the time the yearbook and everything like that, just promoting the sport, which is obviously, what's awesome, what you're doing right now, promoting baseball in Wisconsin. And so it's hard to pick 3 or 4 of those guys, but I would say that WBC executive board is a Mount Rushmore in baseball, Wisconsin, just among themselves. So I have a whole level of appreciation for them. But man, you and I could spend 2 hours just on the great coaches that have influenced us. But I've gotten to know obviously Ryan McGinnis more, Chad Montez. The list just goes on and on. Ernie Millard. I mean, so many guys over the years that have influenced me.
It's one thing in this show is just how much talent is in this area and throughout the state of Wisconsin, coaches and players. And I love that we have that network of local guys, baseball guys. I feel like are always willing to help each other out, and they're fighting a lot of the same battles, and regardless of community and school size. And obviously there's some difference there too, but now in the last few years, I feel like, nationally, us local guys got to know some coaches, and there's more documentaries on them. There's books written about them. Is there anybody that, outside of our area that you follow, other programs that you follow that you look up to, and maybe coaches that your personality aligns with?
Yeah. So I guess, and again, this is a tough, I tried to think on the high school level. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago, and he was one of the speakers. Mark Fuller brought Chan Brown up from Parkview in Georgia. And I really didn't know Chan personally. I had heard about his program. I know he had won some national championships. And, what you just described, and it's why I follow Chan on Twitter. It's why I'll send him a message here and there occasionally. So Chan came up and spoke, and I think it was my first year as, second vice president or whatever. And so we always take the speakers out the night before for a dinner, and we're out for dinner, and man, the stuff he was sharing with me and what he was telling us about his program, him and I developed, kind of a quick little friendship. And then the next year I got invited down to speak at the Georgia clinic and hung out with Chan and his staff. My wife was with us. Joe Waite was there as well, speaking that weekend. And, just to have guys like that, Chan's a tough guy. I mean, he's pretty much running one of the most elite, if not one of the elite programs in the country. And for him to just basically open up and tell me how they do things, how they run things, pretty special. And then obviously it's a huge baseball school. They're drawing thousands of fans at a high school baseball game. So at the high school level, I'd say Chan, I really love the stuff Chan does. Chan Brown, I encourage everyone that's listening to follow him on Twitter and follow Parkview Baseball. It's pretty special what they do down there. At the collegiate level, man, I mean, we could, like I said, there's so many guys. I guess if I had to pinpoint a couple, I'd say, obviously he's passed now, but Augie Garrido, early in my career, for those of you that, haven't seen it, his inning by inning, the Portrait of a Coach DVD, it's a must watch. It's a must buy for any baseball coach. And the reason I say Augie is there's such a passion and an understanding of what this game is all about. He loves his players. He's a little bit old school in his style of coaching. He was a big believer in the bunt, and I'm a big believer in the bunt at the high school level. Augie was a big believer in it at the collegiate level, and it worked really well for him with his national championships. But that DVD really kind of takes you inside their whole 2008 season. They basically followed him around, interviews from past players and whatnot. So that's another guy I had a chance to talk to. And again, it goes back to this baseball fraternity. I ran into him at the ABCA a few years back in Nashville, and I just went up to him, introduced myself. I said, I know you're walking around right now, but I just want to say thank you for your influence on me. And I've done the same thing with Tim Corbin and Jim Schlossnagel, and every one of them took about a half hour to sit and talk with me. Mm-hmm. Tim Corbin actually Tim Corbin and his wife's actually from Kenosha. And so Peter Dooley, my assistant, and I were at the airport a few years ago, and he's eating lunch. So obviously we're not going to bother him, but we're at the airport and we're eating lunch next to him, and they finish. And he actually initiated a conversation with us. And we're like, oh my God, Tim Corbin's starting a conversation with us. He could see we were baseball coaches or whatever. And we sat and talked with Tim Corbin and his wife for like an hour at this airport. And it was just incredible, So the baseball fraternity is pretty special, but those guys, that I mentioned, Jim Schlossnagel, love the stuff he does on social media with his guys, big advocate for his program. I kind of stole our hashtag work wins. I got that from him a few years ago with a video he did that I absolutely loved, and I haven't dropped it since. And then obviously having Alex Pinellas right now at Louisville, I've gotten sort of an inside lens, I guess you could call it, to what goes on at Louisville, just because Alex and I talk regularly. So I got drills that they do. I got, videos that McDonald will show his team. Alex will send to me and say, hey, you got to show the guys this. Dan, coach showed us this yesterday. So that's pretty cool. So even though, like I said, I'm not trying to name drop or anything like that, but those are some of the top programs in the state. And why would you not want to try to follow and emulate a lot of those things those guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. Man, and now taking it kind of back to Oak Creek. So give us like this scope of baseball inside the community, from youth all the way through your program. So where does it start in Oak Creek?
Yeah, so it's really evolved over the years, and you and I have had this conversation at other times, is unfortunately, the little leagues in many communities are really struggling, and that's no different in Oak Creek. Our Little League program used to be the hub of where all our players came from, all the way late 80s, all the way through the 90s, even early 2000s. I mean, Tony Butler, and who was part of our 3-state championship run in the early 2000s, their Little League team was one game away from the national the World Little League World Series. Yeah, exactly. And that was all Oak Creek Little League guys still. So as you and I have talked, it really has evolved, and our Little League still exists. but unfortunately it is not what it used to be in terms of players being signed up and registered to play in it. They have small numbers. A lot of kids at second, third grade now are being plucked and doing tryouts for traveling teams. So in Oak Creek, we have that. We have an organization known as Oak Creek Storm. We have another organization that's known as Oak Creek Zone. And then there's also an extension of the Little League, a tournament team called Oak Creek Junior Knights. So what I do is every year I put on a free coaching clinic every spring. I've been doing it since 2005 when I took over. It's open to everybody. It's open to the Little League coaches have to come. It's part of their training through the official, Master Little League across the country. But then I open it up. I invite those Storm coaches. I invite those Zone coaches. I said, look, this has nothing to do with who you are or who your kid's playing for. We're all in Oak Creek. So, I do basically a 2-hour clinic, kind of take them through drills and things they can do. I give them a handout, share emails with them and things like that. And so our kids kind of go that route, in my opinion, probably till around 6th, 7th grade. And between you and me, that's when it seems like a lot of these teams start to maybe dissolve a little bit. And a lot of our kids have either gone the hitters route, Hitters Baseball Academy down with RJ. We have a handful of PTA kids. We have some kids that go out to Sticks. We have one kid that goes out to Brew State up by you guys. Mm-hmm. So, and now GRB in Milwaukee. We have some Milwaukee Angels kids, who now have the Halos. So it's amazing even in the last 15 years. I mean, when I started coaching, there was the Waukesha Blazers, which was a huge organization in the early 2000s, late 90s. It was pretty much you played for Hitters or you played for the Waukesha Blazers. Now you can go, there's 6, 7 options just in Southeast Wisconsin alone. So that's kind of how kids evolve through Oak Creek. When I get calls of people asking me, and I don't love the model. I'd be lying if I said I did. It's just kind of where we are, Tim, right now. And I guess maybe in society a little bit, and people wanting to either work with their own kid or make sure their kid is working with the right person. And I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it's where we are. And, that's kind of where we are in Oak Creek. A lot of different avenues.
Absolutely. Like I said, and you've been in it the last 15 years, obviously, with your resume and the level of players that have come through and the success you've had. You're seeing the whole gamut. Now, the beauty is, at some level, like they enter their freshman year, right? No matter what hat they wore and what team they've switched, they enter as a freshman, and now they're Oak Creek High School students. Right. So tell us about your program, the high school program. How many teams do you carry? How many kids do you have for tryouts? What's a typical year look like for you guys?
Yeah, so we have 3 teams. Obviously, in the summer, we would refer to them as freshman, JV, and varsity. Now, with the switch to spring, we've all kind of moved to that whole JV1 is what formerly would have been your JV, and now JV2 is typically your freshman team. We do keep pretty big rosters. I know Pat Hansen, your predecessor, used to every year I'd show up and I'd hand him our roster before the game, and he'd pretty much say the same thing. He'd be like, "I can't believe you have this many guys on your roster." So for the varsity, for example, I'm usually around 20 or 22 guys. And the reason I do that is I truly feel that if a kid wants to be a part, and this is something I learned from John Gillespie at South Milwaukee, I said, if a kid before the year, if I can sit down with a kid, which I sit down with every kid after tryouts and let them know where they're at. If a kid wants to be a part of what we're doing and he's willing to accept his role as minimal as it may be, I will give him a uniform. And the challenge with that, as you know, is of course the kid the day of tryouts is going to say, "Yeah, coach, I'll accept that role. I'm willing to do that." So what has helped me over the years is prior to getting here at the high school, I used to do preseason interviews. So every kid that came to our sign-up meeting had a preseason interview with me and my coaching staff, freshman through senior, would come in for like a 15-minute interview, and we'd ask them their baseball background. We'd ask them about, how they're doing in school. What are their interests? Tell us about their family. Really, really neat process. And I stopped doing it when I got to the high school because I feel like I'm just so much more in tune with who everyone is, and I can literally just walk up to a teacher now and all that stuff. And it got to the point where I think at our peak, In the summer, we once had 102 kids try out in our program for all 3 levels. Now I'd say, I think this year we were going to be at 72. So it was consistently, I'd say, in the 80s, at its peak, probably that 102. But right now I'd say, yeah, we're probably in the 70s. And same thing at the lower levels. We try to keep at least 18 on the freshman team. That really was a challenge. Obviously not last, but the first year in spring, only having our freshmen play 13 games or whatever, that was tough. So we try to preach to those kids how important practice is, as we all do. But we basically say, look, this is a year-long tryout for you. If we play 20 games, great, but we're teaching you the game. We're teaching you the right mechanics, the right things we want you to do, so that you have a chance to play at the JV1 or the varsity level. So yeah, our rosters are huge. And I like that. Kids develop so differently. I always tell the story of Eric Semmelhack when I had him. He still gets mad at me to this day, but when he was a freshman, we kept him on the freshman team. And I remember his dad was not happy about that. And Eric wasn't happy about that. But at the time, he was short and he was a little heavier and he had a great arm. But I'm like, yeah, all you have right now is a great arm. You need to develop. And so we kept him on the freshman team. And then he comes back as a sophomore, and he had grown about 5 inches. He was up to like 6'4" at that point. And all of a sudden, he had thinned out. He had become a better athlete, and he was on our varsity as a sophomore through a senior, and went on to have a great career at UWM and get drafted by the Brewers. But that's where he needed to be at that time. He was an example of a kid that, and we've had that too, where we've kept some juniors on the JV. We'll do that. We'll keep some juniors on the JV if they think they might be able to help us as a senior. And we've had a handful of kids that came back as seniors and were all conference players after being on the JV as a junior. So we really try to run it like almost like a minor league system, and keep big rosters, especially now in the spring with how much practice time we get. That's kind of the scope of how we do it with the rosters.
I love that analogy. The big league club, the AAA, the AA, and you kind of move up and down, and
right.
The synergy between all 3. That's just huge. And like you said, puberty is a heck of a thing at this age, right? You never know what's happening with some of these kids and how they're going to do athletically.
And you came from a program that had this, and now you're in a program that definitely has this. So we certainly have the luxury. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that will listen to this and say, well, that's great. You have that luxury of doing that, and we do. You can get passed up in a hurry here. So I've had sophomores that have started on the varsity that didn't start as juniors or seniors, and people are like, well, how does that happen? It's like, well, the kid either stopped working, or the kid stopped growing and didn't stay in the weight room and didn't keep developing his skills. And all of a sudden somebody comes along, and that's kind of what happened with Doran Turchin. When Doran was a freshman, he started the year on the JV as a freshman. He went 19 for 21 to start the season on the JV. And our backup second baseman, I won't name his name, he quit on the varsity. Our backup second baseman quit. Well, what happened 2 days later? My starting second baseman broke his leg. And guess who I called up? Doran Turchin. And Doran Turchin then started at second base for the rest of his freshman year. And we go on and win the state championship. And obviously Doran goes on to have a great career. But who knows, it just goes to show you that, and that kid felt terrible that quit. I mean, he was a senior. And the other seniors on the team, man, did they give him a hard time for
imagine
you quit. And then 2 days later, our starter breaks his leg, and the rest is history. But that's why you give a lot of credit to those kids that stick it out, because when those situations come up, you got to be ready. It's not like football.
What's the Paul Schembechler line, right? Those who stay will be champions.
Yes,
Love that. That's probably a great way to look at it. And it doesn't always mean holding a gold ball or everything else, but just everything else that goes with that.
Right. Exactly. That's a great quote.
One thing that intrigues me always, and I love asking coaches this, is how do you run tryouts? Like, what's the structure? Do you go multiple days? Do you do more of like a showcase? Do you guys try to scrimmage? What's your process?
Yeah. So I would say, we give everybody 3 days, and we spread it out over 4 days, but every class gets 3 full days. So what I mean by that is, so day one, we usually have ninth and 10th graders together, and that's the only day they're together. And then the other 2 days that they'll have of the 4, it's just ninth graders together and just 10th graders together. And then 11th and 12th graders are always just together, because obviously that number is usually a little smaller, maybe in the 20s or whatever. But we go 4 days. I do not cut a kid until he's got all 3 days. We don't. I know some people do that. I'll be honest in saying there's certainly kids you could let go after the first day, but for whatever reason, and I think I got this from Jim Hughes, you owe it to the kid to let him stay, in my opinion, and then in Jim's opinion, and that's something I learned from him is, if this kid wants to come for 3 days, let him come for 3 days, and yeah, you may know after watching him play catch on day 1, but that may be the only high school baseball experience that kid gets. So to tell him after 1 day, and you're right, we definitely do probably what everyone else does. We have our showcase type things we do. We time them in the 60. Yes, we have them throw across the infield. But we try to see as many reps as possible. And, so we obviously, it was new in the spring this year, but we always pick a day. We actually rent hitters, baseball academy, for 1 day just to make sure I can see them. And we didn't do that when we were in the summer, but we started when we went to spring. So I rent hitters for 1 day, and we basically have the full day there, including the field. And we really get a ton of reps on the field, making sure we see a lot of defense on that day. And then we have the upstairs as well, so we can see a lot of swings. And then you're right, when it gets to that 3rd day, we do break down and do a scrimmage when you're starting to get to those last couple spots, and you're trying to figure out, okay, who's who. I think you have to be able to see them in some game type situations. So we'll put runners on base, to see how they act defensively. We'll put the pitchers in a 2-1 count or whatever it is to try to speed things up a little bit. I wouldn't say we have full out scrimmages, but the guys we really need to see, we put in that scrimmage situation on the last day. But yeah, our bullpens are pretty. We chart the bullpens. I'm lucky. I got a huge staff, and we're able to break it apart. I'll be honest. Most of the time, I spend a lot of time watching the pitchers. I spend a lot of time with the pitchers during the tryout process. I got a couple guys that I really trust to evaluate the hitters, and then same thing. Peter Dooley is usually always with the infielders. And watching the defensive stuff. So we kind of all divide and conquer a little bit. And then when it comes down to final decisions, I don't know how you do it, Tim, but I do get the final say on who's on that freshman, that JV2 roster or that JV1 roster, because as much as I trust my guys, and we have a meeting every night after tryouts. We sit down with probably last 2-3 hours every night. We usually go to Wendy's or Applebee's or something every night. We divide our list. We draw out our fields and do your depth charts and everything like everybody else does. But we really have some great conversations. And I like to think we come to the decision as a group, but every once in a while, you got to pull rank and make sure if there's a guy, it's like, I see something, I see something that we got to keep this kid, or vice versa. They see something and I'm like, I don't see it, so, but I think you have to do that as the head guy.
Right. It sounds like some important but long days for you. It sounds like you have to be present with the 9th and 10th graders, and obviously the hours after when you're breaking it down. But I'm sure at the same time you feel like you're doing your due diligence, for that particular group in that spring.
Yeah, we have all my coaches are at every day of every session. I know there's some schools that do it differently, and I don't have an issue with that. But me personally, that's just the way I'm wired. Like I have to see everything. I have to be at every tryout, and all my assistants know. Just because you're a varsity assistant doesn't mean you're not at the freshman and sophomore tryouts. So yeah, they are long days, and I like to think. And here's the other thing we do. I'll just add this real quick. Mm-hmm. We cut every kid to their face, and that's something else I got from Jim Hughes. I talk to each kid individually that we're going to cut, and those are tough conversations, but I think we owe it to those kids to explain to them what they need to work on. Some of them are short conversations, and some of them are real tough, especially when you're cutting a senior who made it as a junior. But I learned that from Jim and some other coaches. So we don't post it. Obviously word spreads like crazy nowadays and everything like that. But we talk to every kid in our program that we cut, and I think that's important.
And I, as a high schooler, I was on the other side of that list as a basketball player. So I always remember
Okay.
that felt like, 20 years ago. And
Right.
I think that's really important as well. I'm sure, you as a dad, you as an AD, you as a teacher, you're looking at all those lenses of what it felt like being in that conversation.
I do encourage our other coaches to do the same, and I think a lot of them do. And it's not that the kid's going to leave loving you because you had that conversation with them, but it's way better. It's way better than the kid just not seeing their name on a board and wondering what the heck, why didn't I make it? Not you just you eliminate that piece of it. It's a hard process. I always say it's the worst day of the year. What's the worst day of the year? Cut day. Cut day is the worst day of the year for any coach. That and the day your season ends, right? So I think we owe it to the kids, and that's something I've always done. And I'll continue to always do.
Yeah. And so obviously the process you guys have in place, the system you guys have set up, all the hands on deck. So, like tell us more about your program. Give us the 30,000-foot view. If you're looking down on Oak Creek baseball, are there certain pillars of your program? Is there a mission statement that you guys hold on tight? You talked about, still a hashtag work wins. So, go a little bit deeper into those things for us.
Yeah. So we do have a mission statement. It's rather long. It's basically a version of what we look for in a player. And it's all the cliche things that we all hear and things like that, but it separates it. And I think this comes back to how me and my coaches were as players is we truly try to speak a lot about playing the game, not only the right way and with respect, but also playing it with an edge. I think this game is so hard and so difficult. One of my favorite quotes from Augie Garrido that I share with my team every year is, I don't love baseball. Baseball is too hurtful of a game to love. What I love is that baseball gives me the opportunity to teach. So what I mean by that is obviously I do love baseball, and obviously Augie Garrido loved baseball. But what he meant by that was the game is a metaphor for life. So we try to spend a lot of time with our kids early on at the beginning of the season, explaining to them that, look, you're able to be a part of something that's really special because of so many people that have come before you, and you're a part of this now. So what do you want your legacy to be? Like, what do you want to get out of this? The opportunity you have in front of you is to come every day, bust your butt, work hard, and know that nothing is just handed to you because you have the Oak Creek uniform on. So every year we almost try to instill in our players that they haven't accomplished anything. And we really kind of pride ourselves on that. Like that, those banners in the gym, those numbers on the conference, you don't have that yet. But what you do have is you have the model for all the teams that have accomplished those things. That model works. So we obviously, not to toot our own horns in those meetings, but we basically say, we know the model. We were a part of that. Peter Dooley was a part of it. I was a part of it as a player, et cetera. Like, we know the model that works. So just you trust the process and know that the process that we have in place. And trust me, I'm not sitting here saying that I don't explain to them that I know everything. I also let them know about all the clinics I go to and the Zoom meetings I have with guys like you and things like that. And then I think it starts with that conversation. And then we ask them, we say, what do you want to get out of this year? And that kind of ties into one of our traditions, which is our dedication day.
If you could explain, Coach, why don't you go ahead and explain the dedication?
Yeah. So like I said, we have a lot of meetings early in the season, and that's one thing I really love about the spring now is we go in a classroom. We'll watch some videos, we'll do some inspirational stuff. I put together a book. They got their Oak Creek baseball manual, which has got anything and everything you need to know about Oak Creek baseball, not only for that year, but the history of our program. And it's really evolved over the years. It's got articles, et cetera. So that's our first couple of days. And then our third day of practice, we usually do what's called our dedication day. And that's where the kids start to take ownership of the team. So the first couple of days, it's getting to know each other a little bit, et cetera. It's starting to practice. It's me, a lot of talking from me. And the third day on our dedication day, it's almost like that's where I turn the team over to them. Okay. And they stand up and they know this is coming. I don't just spring it on them. I say, hey, day 3 is dedication day. you're going to stand up in front of your team, and all your coaches are going to stand up in front of you, and they're going to tell you who they're dedicating the season to. And it can be anybody, and it could be a family member that has passed away. It could be a sibling that they have, with a disability or whatever. It could be a friend that they've lost. And some of them dedicated to their teammates. And that day, we're in there for a good 2 hours, and man, it's one of the most powerful days of the year to see grown men, including myself, and 18-year-olds and 15-year-olds standing up and literally, sitting in their chairs crying, or seeing their teammate cry, because they have to get into detail about their dedication. They can't just stand up and say, I'm dedicating my season to grandma. They have to explain why grandma, and we're able to ask them questions, and dig a little deeper with it. And I always say that's the day that they become a team, because now they know something really intimate about one another, and it's pretty special. And it brings the human element out, and not that we have a lot of, don't get me wrong, every team's got that one or two guys who likes to razz kids or anything like that. But you'd be amazed at how quickly the camaraderie starts to form after that day, because they start to see each other as, hey, this kid's got this. I didn't know this. I didn't know that kid's brother had autism. I didn't know that kid had an older brother that passed away. And so that's a pretty special day.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think, everybody who's listening and tuning in is just, they're thinking about their team, and thinking about, how vulnerable those moments must be. And, how, just about letting your teammates down. It's not just on the field or whatever, being late for practice, you're affecting them in many different ways.
Right.
Are there other traditions, anything else that really stands out, makes your program unique?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know, I got so much that anyone else doesn't do, Tim, but one thing we do, and maybe this is a nugget someone could take, is I meet with our captains every Wednesday. I value the captain role as very important. We don't just slap an asterisk next to their name on the roster and say, all right, you come to the ground rules with me. The team knows that if there's a topic, and I got a very open door policy. I do not run our program like a dictatorship or anything like that. Guys know they can come to me at any time. They know there's specific times they can come and talk to me about things. But I always tell them, I said, look, your captains are your leaders as the bridge, as the liaison. That if you don't understand something, or you got something going on in your personal life that maybe you don't feel comfortable talking to me about, but you're okay telling, Tyler Peck or Gunnar Doyle or whoever. I meet with my captains every Wednesday, and we have a set time, and sometimes it takes 2 minutes. Coach, nothing to report, everybody's doing good, blah, blah, blah. Or it's, hey, just so you know, Johnny's girlfriend broke up with him, so they were together for 2 years, just so you have a heads up of why he may not be himself. Or, so-and-so's, another thing they're supposed to do, and I do this as well, but they're supposed to have conversations about grades with kids. They're supposed to have conversations about, what are you doing this weekend? Who are you hanging out with? So I put a lot on my captains in hopes of just developing them. It's just another way to develop them as leaders. And then as the year goes on, before you know it, and you know this, Tim, even the guys you haven't assigned as captains, now they're doing that too. Before you know it, guess what? Most of the guys are hanging out with each other. Before you know it, the teams are at the same place that weekend, somebody's house. They're talking about their classes. They're talking about their grades. So, like I said, and I'm not sitting here saying I don't have kids that have made mistakes. I got kids that have made mistakes in the classroom, made mistakes outside the classroom, but I really place a big ownership on our captains, and I think we take a lot of pride in how we do that as well.
One thing I love out there is that you have that scheduled built-in time, in the rat race of our season and everything else that goes on. I'm sure it'd be easy. We've all neglected certain things, and to have that time built in, I'm sure is just amazing. I do have a follow-up question though on captains. Like, what's your process for choosing captains? Is it player vote? Is it coaches? Is there, anything else in place?
Yeah. I did a player vote once in the 16 years, and it kind of backfired on me. And so ever since then, That was pretty much just a popularity vote. It really wasn't the things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for high character guys. I'm looking on and off the field. I'm looking for guys that the other players respect in their work ethic. So, for example, I've had plenty of captains who got 3 or 4 at bats. This past in 2019, Logan Ashenhurst was one of our 3 captains, and he got 3 at bats all year. But he was, top 5 in his class. Everybody loved Logan. Logan had some, some history of being a leader in other sports, that type of thing. And it was a no-brainer. When Logan Ashenhurst talked, even though he only had 3 at bats, like every player took that as gold. It was just as if I was telling them to do something. So we look for high character. I personally look at grades. I want someone that's been a model in the classroom as well. I tried to make sure that they're likable. I know they got to be someone that other kids feel comfortable going to talk to. If they're, and I've had some great players over the years, and the parents have said, "Why didn't you make him a captain?" And I said, "You know what? He's a great player, but he's not the most sociable. He kind of just shows up and does his thing, but kids don't really go out of their way to talk to him in terms of, what may be going on in their life, like, because he doesn't necessarily seek that out. He's kind of, introvert. And so when you get a player like that, I think it's not the best guy to choose. And it's not to say you don't work with that kid on that, but to make a kid a captain just because he's your best hitter or he's your best pitcher, to me, that's not what it's all about. That's not how it works. So sometimes kids and parents have a hard time understand that. So back to your original question, our coaching staff decides. We get together and we talk about it. We spend a lot of time talking about it. And then what we do is we bring each kid in and we have the conversation. Here's what we're thinking of doing. We're thinking about making you a captain. Here's what would be expected of you. Do you accept this? And, I've had one kid in 16 years say, "You know what, I'd rather just show up and play coach. And, I don't know and I thought that was pretty, impressive for a high school kid to say that. Because like I said, we have high expectations for our captains. So.
Beautiful. I know you guys really pride yourself on being a blue collar program, so I think what's interesting is how do you instill that? You're looking for players with an edge. Again, they get through the process, and obviously playing varsity baseball at Oak Creek is pretty prestigious. And I know you're a very humble guy, but if you look at the banners, you look at the resume, to really make it through 4 years at Oak Creek baseball, and then, to have that edge. So what do you guys do as a staff to create that?
Yeah. So I think one thing that we do is, and this is going to sound weird, but we actually practice some blue collar type things. And I know that sounds weird. So what do I mean by that? Well, we actually practice talking defensively. Like we will at practice put guys out there. There will be no ball, and we will practice talking, and we'll go around the infield, and you will be on the spot. And we want to hear you talking about what you're doing. And guys think it's the goofiest thing, but we do it, and it works. And then we go around and we practice talking from the dugout. We talk about, if you're not in the game, how are you talking from the dugout? And someone might say, well, that doesn't equate to playing. And I would argue, yes, it does, because your energy that you bring, whether you're up 5-0 or down 5-0, your energy is contagious, just like hitting is contagious. So we have to have high energy. We don't have softball chants. Okay. We don't do that stuff. There's certain limits I don't allow. In fact, there's been plenty of times where I've had to tone my guys down, like of certain things, like, hey, we didn't practice it. We didn't talk about saying that or whatever. The other thing we do is we practice running out to our position. Like, that is our conditioning, as I'm sure a lot of coaches do. One of my favorite conditioning drills at the end of practice is running in and out from your position. We talk about all the little things. We talk about, we really pride ourselves on base running. I think you can tell a lot by a team on how their effort and energy is by how they run the bases. We are a team that tries to be crazy aggressive. Our program prides us that we are crazy aggressive on the bases and bunting. Like, we try to create chaos for the other team. And nowadays, Tim, you know this, you just have to get creative in a lot of cases with the bottom of your order when you're facing guys. I mean, we're consistently seeing guys now throwing in the mid 80s. Like it's
Right.
not that big a deal anymore. To
Right.
see the starting pitcher from the other team is in the first inning is 85. Like that's not uncommon.
Right.
So we have to spend a lot of time on like how do we get our edge. So we're going to get our edge by doing all these little things, you know, and not to knock coaches by any means, but yeah, do we take batting practice? Sure, we take batting practice, but batting practice is like down here, okay? Like our individual work that we're doing in the cage and working on your swing, that's up here, and then the round of BP is down here. You know what I'm saying? So going back to your original question is, and if you come to a game, you'll see like my coaches are locked in, our bench is locked in, and it starts at the freshman level. And I've been lucky. I've had some great freshman coaches and JV level coaches. Will Comfort, my JV1 coach, was a head coach, a head varsity coach in Iowa and an AD in Iowa before he moved up here. So he kind of fell into our lap there. But I got some guys that really, I got a lot of former players on our staff. I think that helps because there's just a right way to do things, and you got to have those kids that are willing to call each other out. You really do. So we talk a lot about that. You have to call a kid out because those coaches aren't going to see everything. There's a right way and a wrong way that we do things, and you got to empower your kids to step up. And sometimes it leads to a confrontation. I'd be lying if I said we didn't have a scuffle in the dugout a few years ago. We did, and it was friggin' awesome. Like it was embarrassing at the time, but when you heard about why it was because somebody wasn't, you know, into the game the way that the other guys expected them to be in the game, and basically they were trying to tell them to leave the dugout, and it basically turned into a little bit of a scuffle. But us coaches got together after the game, and we were like, "That's awesome." You know, like how can you be mad about that? It was embarrassing at the time, but so we talked about maybe a better way to handle it later on, but. I don't know. It's all those little things, Tim. And like I said, I think you got to practice it. You can't just show up on the field, and you know this. You can't just show up and say, "Oh yeah, I got a bunch of hard-nosed kids." Okay, you know, that's all right. You do. I see three ball players that look like some real dirt bags that get after it. But that's just natural. That's just them. How do you get not only 9 of them on the field, but how do you get the other, in my case, 11 in the dugout? To be like that. And it's not easy, but we practice it, we work at it, and we tell them, if you can't do this, then you can't be here. And you know, again, I'm in a position to say that. I know Joe Waite up at Prairie Farm is just now at Cumberland. You know, when he was at Prairie Farm, he's like, Scott, if I got 10 warm bodies, I was happy. So I understand what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
or with larger school coaches, but and again, I'm blessed in that we're in a position where we can say that. I can honestly tell a kid, you know, and Alex Benellis and Doran Turchin were those guys. You know, that's the best part, is our best players were those guys. And, you know, when Alex Benellis was younger, he'd come and watch Tony Butler, and then and then he'd watch Hayden Krimmer, and then Doran Turchin watched Hayden Krimmer, and then Benellis was come in and seeing Doran Turchin. I mean, and then it's just, we've been lucky. We've had our great players, and you know this. Your best player has to be your best leader, okay? And I talked earlier about a kid being an introvert. He doesn't have to be the captain, but he's got to do everything right all the time, you know? And those are the teams that find themselves in trouble, in my opinion, is when your best player is almost like a cancer. And don't get me wrong, I've had a couple of kids over the years where they're really good players, and it's like, God, he's just not likable. You know, but you work with them, and by the time they're senior, you hope you got it figured out.
Right. Yeah. And you know, you mentioned parents a few times, and obviously in your role as AD and, you know, high school of your size, obviously parents have a, you know, tremendous impact in communities. So as a baseball program, are there certain things you have in place to engage parents or to communicate with them? I mean, even just beyond the mass emails or the reminders,
Right.
like what else do you do, you know,
Yeah.
to keep parents involved?
So I start in September. We have our first, anyone who's going to be interested in playing baseball that school year, we have a meeting in September, and we kind of go out and we lay out what the options are for their kids. I want parents to be well aware ahead of time that there's all these different places they can go and see. We give them an open gym schedule. A few times I've brought in BRX, Josh and Brooks over at BRX. It's been a couple years since we brought them in, but we have had a handful of guys that go out there and see them. I brought in a couple other, speakers. I brought in some past players to talk about what it takes to play at the college level. So that's like our September meeting.
Yeah.
And then right after that meeting, our booster club then stays around and tries to get as many folks as they can to be a part of our booster club, which is called the Oak Creek Bleacher Bunch. It's been around since I was a player. They do a great job. We have two big fundraising events. I've talked to you about in the past. We run a wiffle ball tournament for 8-year-olds up through 13-year-olds. It's hugely successful. We bring in about 12, 13 grand on that. And then we do adult only social, like a dance, at the community center the week before the season starts, the week before tryouts. We call it our leadoff dance. Again, something I stole from Jim Hughes. He called his batter up dance. I changed ours to the leadoff dance. And, there's, raffles and silent auction, all that stuff. And we do about 6-7 grand on there, and then we're done. Like, that's it. Those are the two things we do. We don't sell cookie dough, or we don't do any of that stuff. Nothing against people that do, but I don't want to do any of that stuff. So we literally knock out all of our fundraising in 2 weekends, and the parents, we ask them to chip in for 2 weekends, help us get what we can get for those weekends, invite people to the dance, and the wiffle ball, that takes care of itself. We've been turning teams away. We're up to like 36 teams. We got 3 gyms going all weekend, Saturday and Sunday, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And we do really well with that. The nice thing about that now is it's in season, so I can require all the players to be there and work it. In the past, I always had to ask them to volunteer because we do it in the spring. Now we have our team pick. So, but going back to parents, I've been very lucky. I'm not going to sit here and say I haven't had, tough conversations with parents. I just always try to remind them once the teams are selected, we have another parent meeting, and I just try to remind them of where this school is at, and that by all means, as a parent, I want all their kids to be all conference. I want all their kids to play collegiately if they want to. And I tell them that we can make that happen, and especially that whole college conversation. You and I both know, Tim, there's a place for nearly anyone who wants to, with relative, skill at certain levels. There's a lot of places that kids can play. And you and I have both seen it, where a kid doesn't even play much for his high school team and he goes on to play somewhere in college, and that's great. But especially now in the spring with the limited time, that's the one thing I've found hard is, you just aren't able to get the 40, 50 at bats for, your backup left fielder that you used to be able to get in the summer.
Right.
So that's been a change, and that's not easy. Again, we're going to have a pretty deep pitching staff this year. I don't know how the heck I was going to get, 20, 25 innings for certain guys that really, truly deserved it. But,
Right.
it is what it is.
What I'd love to hear more about is that bleacher club.
Yeah.
Is that all just baseball families? Is it freshmen through years? Is it?
So we are. It's great. So we have a board, and they have bylaws, and they're a 501c3. They have to report to the school district what they're fundraising and what they're doing with their money and things like that. I'm really lucky. I had my current president, Steve Bouch. His last kid graduated in 2015, and he's still my president of our booster club for baseball. So anyone can join it. Most parents, most families join it like going into freshman year, and it's one meeting a month. I'm at the meeting. There's a board. There's a president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. And yes, I'll be honest, we've had situations where someone that's a board member, their kid didn't make it, and that's always awkward. But like I said, I pride myself on making sure we do things the right way. So I think there's been 4 of those instances over the years where someone's been on the board, maybe when their kid was a freshman or sophomore, but then they don't make the varsity. And then you just obviously have to fill their seat. But yeah, they run it as a 501c3, and they also are in charge of like our concessions and stuff. But they really help me out a lot because they take so much of that off my plate. I play a role in that. Obviously, I'll organize the players for the events, and if some parents aren't responding, then I kind of step in and maybe send an email like, hey, hate to break this to you, but you're the only family that we don't have signed up. Is something going on? But we'd really appreciate everyone's help with this. And so I've had to do that on occasion here and there. They're also the group that when our batting cages have to go up, you know, we're trying, they come and do that to give our maintenance staff a little break. You know, they'll come and do work on the fields. When we were playing at Avonshine, they built the dugouts that were at Avonshine. They raised the money for the scoreboard, the new fencing, because we were playing at a city park and the city didn't have the money for any of that. So pretty much everything that's at that field at Avonshine, which is now going to be just for JV2, that was all Oak Creek Bleacher Bunch. I'm guessing you add everything up, I bet they did probably $75,000, $80,000 worth of improvements at Avonshine Park, which is now a pretty good freshman field.
Yeah, I'd say. And now obviously you guys are moving, into your beautiful new facility, which I know was a major effort by you, staff, and the whole community. And this first spring is supposed to open. Obviously we get down here, like everyone else across the state and essentially across the country. But what happened during the shutdown was a ton of Zoom meetings and a lot of development opportunities. So I'd love to know what's something that you've learned recently that's maybe challenged what you currently do or made you rethink of something how you teach. What lately?
Yeah, so just like you, having those Zoom meetings with you and Sean Wagner and Feather and everybody else that was on there, Ryan McGinnis, that was awesome. And it was I tell my wife, it's like one of the blessings in disguise of this whole thing is it brought me closer to you and some of those other coaches that I didn't know real well, and it gave me the chance to. You sat back and you're like, okay, well, what am I going to do right now? Oh, what did we all do? What did us baseball coaches do? We hopped on every podcast and every Zoom meeting with every college coach. That was amazing, and to me, to answer your question, I really continue to dive more into two things. One, the strength training. It's something we've gotten better at, but Zach DeShant, the strength and conditioning guy at TCU, who I'm sure you follow on Twitter, I read his book, Movement Over Maxes, just took a ton of stuff from that. I already have ideas of how we're going to change some things. I'll be honest, I really have relied on BRX, like Josh and
Brooks,
to kind of guide us. We followed their in-season stuff the last couple of years, and it's worked really well. It worked really well in the spring. It's another positive of spring baseball is being able to have that time, because of the weather, to have that time to actually keep doing strength training. And you could do it in the summer, but you didn't always do it as a team because you were at the field from 3:30 to 8 o'clock or whatever. Now it's a little bit different. So continuing to develop what I want that to look like. Again, I just kind of took Brooks and Josh for their word and all right, this is what you do. But now reading some of Zach's stuff, just trying to add to that, because that's the one area, I'll be honest. You've seen me. I'm not some monster or anything like that or specimen, but I know enough. I know enough what we need to do as players to be conditioned. And that being said, I just need to keep developing there. The other thing is the whole throwing program. I'm really interested in this driveline program. And, again, I'm lucky. Maybe down the road, I've talked to a bunch of college coaches, as I know you have, picking their brain, like, do you use Rapsodo? Like, what part of driveline do you use? Do you use Rapsodo? Is that useful to use at the high school level? Because I want to give my kids, and you and I both know we're hamstrung by our limited time, with our kids. But they're getting some of that at the academies, which is good. I certainly think we feed off each other. I think, hitters and GRB, there's certain things that they are great for. And I also think they rely on us during our seasons to really get down to the in game and the strategies of the game. I'm not going to lie. I know my guys come back throwing harder and hitting the ball harder off the tee and, in general, because of all the reps and work they're doing at their academy. I get that. But then I also know my guys play better in the summer for those academies because they just got done going through what I would consider a pretty good high school experience, with me and my coaches. So I think we feed off each other, and I'm getting off topic a little bit, but my point is, if those academies and those groups are going to start talking to these kids about spin rate, and they're going to start, it's more than just, and we all got the pocket radar, right? Or we all got our radar guns, and that's great. And there's a place for that, but boy, it seems like the game, I just want to make sure I stay up with the game so that I can offer my kids everything they need to know. And you talk to some college coaches, and I'm not going to name names here. You talk to some college coaches, and they're like, we don't use that, and I'm not going to use it. And on one hand, I'm like, okay, it's a successful program, so you can't argue with the success of the coach that's saying that. But then at the same time, it's like, okay, but if it does help your kid, and you got your kid for 6 months or 7 months at the college level, why wouldn't you use it if it can maybe help your kid? The challenge becomes for us, Tim, is do we spend $8,000 on a Rapsodo gadget that we can use for 2 months, 2.5 months? Because we can't use it at open gym, right? We can't use it at, you're not going to send it home with a kid when it's $8,000. So that's, to me, one of our biggest drawbacks. And when I talk to Chan Brown and I hear that he gets his baseball players every day, 8th hour, all year long down in Georgia, that's tough. That's a different world. I don't know. I think like all of us, we're trying to navigate. We go to these clinics and we see all this technology and it's like, man, that's awesome. Like I would totally dive into that. And I'm like, but wait, once I dive into it, I have no time to utilize it. I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's kind of where I'm at.
No, same. I think that the opportunity cost of every minute you spend on one thing, you take a minute away from something else, and and trying to prioritize what it is. And it sounds to me like you're trying to offer kind of a buffet of options. If you J-band, or if you're a long toss, if you like in balls, we want to have something for you at Oak Creek Baseball.
Yeah.
And to me, that just shows how much you're evolving and trying to be opening your arms to all types of kids, because from like coaches or academies or private instructors, or maybe very little at all, and you want to have resources for them. And it's fantastic. But what always intrigues me too is, so now you've been in this chair for many, many years. Like I said, your resume is as impressive as you're going to find. You're, president of WBCA, all these things. Like, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting at 18 years old, or even, that first job in the early 2000s, coming off of state championships? If you could give advice to your younger self?
Yeah, so the best advice I ever got, it actually came from one of my players. So I talk about, the passion and playing with an edge and all that. In 2006, Dave Perro was my starting catcher. He asked after a game, we just lost to Brook East, and he said, "Coach, can I talk to you?" And I said, "Yeah." So we're walking back to the bus. It was a long walk from their field to where the bus was. And he says, "Coach, you're making some of the guys a little too nervous out there." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you're so intense and you're so into every pitch and every play that some of us feel like we're playing tight because we don't want to screw up." And I thought, and it was, and it still is, one of the greatest moments of my coaching career, because I was so caught up, which leads into my next point. I was so caught up in the result of the game, and I took everything so personally. If someone made an error, I literally felt it was like my fault. Or if a pitcher didn't hit a spot, I felt like it was my fault. And we all hate losing, and there's all those quotes about, winning it does not feel as good as losing feels terrible, or whatever, the quotes go. So that moment with Dave Perro helped me relax a little bit, and which leads into my next point. I started to think more about, and this has even evolved in the last few years, because the baseball talent has gotten so good in our area and in our state. I have started to accept, I don't know if accept is the right word, but I have started to realize that more and more, maybe it's not us losing the game as it is the other team beat us. So I spend time with our team talking about that. I said there's a difference between us losing the game and the other team beating us. So if we go out and lose a 2-1 game to Kenosha Tremper, and our kid pitched a great game and their guy pitched a great game, and we hit hard shots and they made every play, and they hit hard shots and found a couple more holes, they beat us. Okay, we didn't lose. So now I go home that night, and we all do this. You go downstairs, you say hi to the family or whatever, and put your kids to bed. Then you go downstairs and think about the game, and I've gotten better at realizing, did we lose or did we get beat? And I'm okay. I'm much better now. So I would go back and tell my younger self, you need to ask yourself as a young coach, did you lose today or did you get beat? And it's okay to get beat, because then you just tip your hat. It's freaking baseball, I got a quote above my computer here from Clint Hurdle when he was the manager of the Rockies, and a reporter after the game, they had lost. It was actually the year they made it to the World Series. They lost in the World Series, but in the divisional round, I think the reporter says to him, "Well, tonight was a pretty crushing defeat. How do you rebound from that?" And they obviously went on later to win the series. But Clint Hurdle looked at the reporter and he laughed. And the reporter said, "What's so funny?" And Clint Hurdle said, "Crushing was when the doctor walked in to the delivery room and told me that my little girl was born with a birth defect. We just lost a baseball game tonight. That was not crushing. We get to play another baseball game tomorrow." And so it's an article about just kind of how Clint Hurdle, had that perspective on life and things like that, and what's made him a great manager in the league for a long time. So I kind of talked to my players about that. Now, that being said, I'm very competitive and I want to win, and I try to instill that in my players. But at the end of the day, if your kids, are mentally prepared and they're physically and mentally there that day and they get beat, then they get beat. It's baseball. Dean Smith always said, if you live and die on whether you win or lose a game, you're going to be dead a lot. So.
Yeah, man. Well, it sounds like obviously you've got a ton of different resources and, articles and books and podcasts and, so like, what are you on lately in regards to, if you could send us down a better path of, if you had to recommend a book or a couple books, or, a blog.
I got a couple that apply to so many. I make sure every one of our coaches in our athletic department has a book by Bill Walsh called The Score Takes Care of Itself. Just an unbelievable book that talks about how Bill Walsh basically turned the San Francisco 49ers into nothing into a dynasty, and just incredible stories about him making sure Joe Montana and Jerry Rice knew every custodian's name at Candlestick Park. I mean, just little things about building a successful program. And then obviously I talked about Augie Garrido. If any coach has not seen that DVD, go on eBay and buy it for $9.99 or whatever. Inning by Inning, a portrait of a coach. There's bits and pieces of it that I show my team. And there's some that I don't. There's an edited version that you can show your team. But man, it is impressive. Just the dugout conversations and things like that. Quiet Strength is another great book that I read years ago by Tony Dungy. I applied a lot of that things in my personal life. That one helped me personally kind of take a step back and put myself in the shoes of the people around me, like my wife and my family, and that's important, obviously. That Movement Over Maxes by Zach DeShant, huge, great book. Got to order that. And then like all of it, we talked about it. Anything with Jeremy Sheetinger, and now he's with the Dugout podcast on the Stick and Ball TV, so I subscribe to that. Listening to his podcasts and constant, great guests and whatnot. And then the other thing is, I'm a big believer in any print resources that you can get and share small snippets with your players. So I'm constantly looking for things in the Inside Pitch magazine, Collegiate Baseball. I'm constantly copying things. And then Twitter. I become huge on Twitter, which is funny because when I became AD, the superintendent walked in. We had a superintendent about 3 years into me being AD, and he said, "Hey, I noticed you don't have a Knights Athletics Twitter page." And I said, "No." And he goes, "Can I ask you why?" I said, "Yeah, because I hate social media. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on anything." And he goes, "Do me a favor, play around on it." He goes, "I think you might be surprised on what you find on it." So Jers Heck, he forced me to start a Knights Athletics Twitter page. And from there, I was like, oh my God, how do I not have an Oak Creek Baseball Twitter page? So obviously started the baseball Twitter page, and now I get yelled at every night that I'm watching too many baseball videos, and Trent Mongero and Nate Trosky and all these guys. And Julie's like, "Really? Like you're watching that video again? You watched it 3 nights in a row?" And I'm like, "I know, but I'm taking notes today and blah blah blah." So that being said, Tim, you got to be careful because there's a lot of idiots out there too, and you got to pick and choose, just like anything. Just like I always tell our coaches when we go to a clinic, you try to make sure you get 2 things. I'm going to try to make sure I get 2 things. Let's all make sure we bring 2 things away from this clinic, and that'll be a success. So that's kind of what I do on Twitter. Just, is there something I can implement in my program? And I like retweeting stuff. I like liking it and then retweeting it. I'll forward it to my seniors and my players and say, "Hey, watch this video." And I think we're all starting to do that. And if you're not, that's another thing. Going back to what would I tell my younger self? I probably wish I would have been on Twitter a little earlier than I was, and I tell my coaches in our athletic department, if you are, and you've heard this expression, but if you are doing pretty much the same thing you were doing 5 years ago, you're behind. Every sport continues to evolve. Doesn't mean you can't hang on to your favorite drills. I still love my Tucson drill. I still love there's certain T drills I love that I'm always going to do. But like you said, you got to evolve and keep trying to find things. So those are some of the resources I'm constantly using.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I have to I promised you. So I really appreciate your time today, Scott, and everything else. And if you have anything else for us?
No, Tim, I just want to thank you. Obviously, it's been great getting to know you, and the fact that you're going to be doing this and talking to other coaches. And, I hope I didn't hit a weak ground ball to third base rolling over here on your first show. So I just really appreciate you doing this. I'm excited to tune in and listen. And, I tell everybody when you're going for a walk or you're hopping on a treadmill, man, find resources. And what you're doing here, like I said, hopefully somebody out there got one thing from me today. And the next show you do, I hope I get at least one or two things from the next person you talk to. And if that happens, then everything you're doing is amazing because you're making a huge impact. So thanks for doing this. I think this is great.
Thanks.
All right, Tim, take it easy, buddy. Thank you.